ninth conference on the regulation of infrastructure. This year we are discussing about sector coupling, how to regulate convergence. In this session, we will discuss a paper by Johannes Brauer and Manuel Villavicencio. The title of the paper is The Value of Avoided Curtailments, Increasing Welfare Through the Involvement of TSOs in the Operation of Power-to-Hydrogen Units.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I will start directly with the presentation. So the integration of renewable energy leads to more grid congestion and increasing curtailments for which renewable energy owners get mostly a financial compensation. So this represents somehow an inefficiency. However, there are ways to reduce curtailments as offered by sector coupling technologies such as power-to-hydrogen units. Electricity is used in this case to produce hydrogen, which is an energy carrier that can be used in various other sectors. The technology is still at the pilot project stage and not competitive on a purely market basis. After market clearing of the day-ahead market, TSOs have full information about grid flows and balancing needs. However, vertical unbundling rules forbid them to operate conversion units such as power-to-hydrogen units. Therefore, renewable electricity that cannot be transferred due to grid constraints has to be curtailed and hence spilled. The use of this electricity, which has an increasing trend due to the increasing penetration of renewables and the decreasing investment costs of power-to-hydrogen units, suggests that the shared operation of these units might change their economics and might offer opportunities for both market participants and TSOs. So the research question analyzed in the study is, can the involvement of TSOs in the production of hydrogen open up business cases for power-to-hydrogen units and lead to welfare gains due to avoided costs of curtailments? To answer the research question, we apply a combination of two tools. A day-ahead market model is used in a first step. It cost minimizes the overall plant dispatch. High level of technical details is considered, and the model results in an hourly dispatch and the day-ahead market prices of the analyzed price zone. As this market dispatch might technically not be feasible due to grid constraints, we plug the dispatch in a second step into a direct current power flow model. The model considers the location of generators and load, as well as technical constraints of the transmission system. Grid congestions are resolved in a cost minimized way, and the model results in dispatch and curtailment actions that are required to balance the system after market clearing. So this framework is applied to the case of Germany in the Horizon 2022. In Germany, end consumers have to pay a significant levy of 6.7 cents per kilowatt hour to compensate for renewable energies that are out of the market. In Germany in 2018, there were more than 5 terawatt hours of curtailments, renewable curtailments, and the number tripled in only 4 years. Consequently, end consumers had to pay more than 600 million euros for the unused electricity. The main reason for this amount of curtailments is a geographical difference between wind favorable sites in the north and the main load locations in the south, and the weak grid in between both zones. So when modeling the grid congestions in step 2, we split Germany in north and south and consider the power line corridors indicated here by the numbers 1 to 5. One result of the day-ahead market dispatch is shown on the top graph. On the x-axis, we see the hours of the year. On the y-axis, the scheduled north-south flow. The positive y-axis range, shown in orange, shows the flow direction from north to south, and we can clearly see that this is the actual flow direction in most hours of the year. Only in a few hours, the flow is a reverse, and this is mainly during summer when there's less wind. On the bottom graph, we see the correlation of market prices and curtailments. On the x-axis, again, we have the hours of the year, but this time ordered according to the magnitude of the electricity prices, starting with the lowest electricity prices on the left-hand side and ending with the highest electricity prices on the right-hand side. This is on the left y-axis. On the y-axis, we see the curtailments illustrated in a binary way. 0 stands for no curtailments, 1 stands for curtailments, and we can clearly see the high density of the orange bars on the left-hand side indicate that there is a positive correlation between curtailments and low electricity prices. And this is mainly the case when there's a lot of wind in the system. So based on the model results, we analyze 4 different business cases for power to hydrogen units. And they are illustrated here by the 4 colored curves in the graph. On the x-axis, we have the full load hours of the power to hydrogen unit. On the y-axis, we have the resulting hydrogen prices. The dashed black line shows the benchmark of a CO2 abated hydrogen from steam method reforming, which is currently the most competitive source of hydrogen. And yeah, the first business model represents the case of a fully market-based operation. Market participants own and operate the system. The investment is subject to a WACC of 8%. And for all electricity that is fed into the electrolyzer, the market participant has to pay all charges, including the renewable levy, on top of the electricity price. And we see that at very low full load hours, the price of hydrogen is really high, as the investment costs are only split over a few operating hours. With increasing operating hours, the investment costs are then better distributed so that the curve decreases. However, we also see that the curve constantly remains above the benchmark, indicating that the fully market-based operation is not competitive. The second business model represents a system-oriented operation. In this case, the TSO owns and operates the unit. The investment is subject to a reduced WACC of 5.5% as it is a regulated basis. The TSOs are only allowed to use electricity that would otherwise be curtailed. The cost for this electricity is assumed to be 0 and no charges have to be paid. So this is the orange curve, and we see that it is also really high at low full load hours for the same reason as in the previous business model. However, at about 1,350 hours, one breaks even, and during 900 hours, until reaching the maximum amount of hours where curtailments occur, the facility can be operated on a cost competitive level. And selling the hydrogen at this operating point at the benchmark price would lead to a profit of €1.58 per kilogram hydrogen. So as TSOs are not allowed to make any profits, the profits need to be redistributed somehow, for example, by reducing the renewable energy levy. Yes. So, and the third business model, and this would lead to welfare gains. The third business model represents a combination of system-oriented and market-based operation. So TSO owns the plant and operates it in times when there's curtailments. When there's no curtailments anymore, the market participants have operating rights about the unit. They have to pay all charges and the market prices for the electricity they use. The first part of the curve of this business model is identical to the previous one. However, once there are no curtailments anymore, then the market participant operates the system. The curve increases due to the cost of electricity and the charges. However, we can see that for the facility can be operated on a competitive level over additional 1,500 hours. And selling the electricity at this operating point would not lead to any additional profits for the TSO, as they are already offset by the market participant. However, considering the contribution of the market participant in the operation of the system and the increasing utilization leads to less idle capacity, and that means also a welfare gain. The fourth business model is quite similar to the previous one, except that market participants don't have to pay a renewable levy anymore. So we see that the curve remains under the benchmark, indicating that it remains competitive. However, as a significant share of electricity that is used has to be bought at the market, and as the CO2 intensity increases and surpasses the benchmark CO2 intensity, it is questionable to argue for this exemption of the renewable levy. However, this is currently discussed in the German policy. To conclude, the assessment of the different business models showed that regulatory adaptations can lead to welfare gains through the production of competitive hydrogen. The involvement of TSOs is key to achieve this. The use of otherwise curtailed electricity could help to foster the market introduction of power to hydrogen and a hydrogen economy that might be required in coming years to better integrate renewables and to meet climate goals. The obtained insights therefore suggest that the relaxation of vertical unbundling rules should be put on the agenda for allowing system-oriented power to hydrogen operation. The sharing responsibility between public, regulated, and private sector opens new business opportunities to contribute to climate goals, and ownership and operating rights schemes might be allocated efficiently between the two parties. The work is about to be improved in various ways. We plan to integrate neighboring country endogenously, and the same is the case for the operation and the sizing of the power to hydrogen unit. So that's all. I added a list of references, and now I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to get any feedback.
So, of course, we would like to thank Johannes for this summary, because it saves already us some work which we already prepared here. And so of course, the research question going on and the methodology and the results and conclusion, we summarize it here. And also what we would like to start, at least in terms of feedback, is the main positive points. And we think it's an interesting and foreseen research question, looking into the question of power to hydrogen systems, ownerships and operation, at the same time as within an energy system where you have renewable energy increasing penetration. We also think that the geographical setting of Germany is an interesting one to examine. And the approach of 4 different business models is also offers quite interesting insights. At the same time, you also put a lot of effort into the modeling and collecting the database of power generators, heat generators, and storage. Also in terms of the German power grid, how do you simplify it while at the same time keeping at least a sufficient level of detail. So we think these points are good, and we will also like, however, to present our own feedback regarding what we think could be improved or has to be corrected. So in the next slide, the team will go over the major remarks we have regarding market design and monopoly regulation, and their 3 key points. I leave the floor to Tim.
Thank you, Piero. So Piero is more of an expert in technology and modeling. I focused on the market design question and the question around monopoly regulation. I see for me, there were 3 controversial, let's say, assumptions or points in the paper. So first, you said today, and also it's written in the paper, that TSOs have full information about grid flows and balancing needs, information that is not available to market participants. Related to that, you also say grid expansion is a straightforward solution for all the issues that the German grid is facing. But actually the fact that only TSOs have information about grid flows is, I think, due to a flaw in market design. So currently, as you also point out in the paper, the German bidding zone is 1 zone. If you would actually split that up into multiple zones, or if you would allow the use of somehow second best solution flexibility markets, then you would allow market participants to have a lot more information about what's going on in terms of grid flows, because that would actually be reflected within the prices in wholesale markets. So therefore, I think by just considering this, let's say, worst situation, while where the bidding zone would remain as 1 in the next 10 years, you actually discard an important revenue option for market participants, because you can imagine that if, for example, you have a zone in the north where there is a lot of wind operation, that suddenly it might be, and with a lot of, let's say, because it's all about price differentials, at least the volatility of prices will increase, and therefore the profitability of a market-based investment in P2 hydrogen could improve a lot. So this is the first point, that I think the paper deserves a more thorough discussion of this literature stream around the market design and renewables integration. Second, my major methodological concern is that you have this artificial split between the day-ahead market and the congestion management market. So actually you say that TSOs, they would use their power to hydrogen units or market participants to avoid curtailment after the day-ahead market clearing. So actually to somehow intervene as redispatch. So I wonder why to wait with P2H until the congestion management phase? Why not let P2H just bid into the day-ahead market? And as such, actually there is no distinction anymore between curtailed energy, would have been curtailed energy, or curtailed energy. So this kind of artificial idea of it is only solving or is only like transforming energy that would have otherwise be curtailed would actually not be possible anymore if you would let P2H bid into the day-ahead market. But of course, if you let P2H bid into the day-ahead market, the conflict of interest with having a TSO owning such kind of conversion facility would even be worse than it is already depicted in the paper now. So you say TSO involvement is crucial and would lead to welfare gains. I agree that the WACC of TSOs could be lower than market participants. And this is, this is also one of the major drivers of the results. The fact that TSOs don't have to pay for levies and so forth is actually a subsidization of TSOs if they would do such kind of practice. But by having TSOs operating such kind of facilities, you could somehow kill the appetite of market participants to do this. And therefore, this could actually also have a cost in terms of the cost of not having competition or allowing P2 hydrogen to compete within the day-ahead market and maybe into the congestion management market. So why not better emphasize this, let's say, more neutral point of market participants versus TSOs? I think now it's a bit too much. Lights are shed on TSOs, they can invest it cheaper and they have all the information. While I think this is a bit too easy to say. So this would be my three major remarks on the market design and monopoly regulation aspect. So over to you, Piero.
Yeah. So on my side, I will speak over more on the major remarks regarding modeling and technology. At least looking at the paper and the modeling side, I think that there are some key modeling and technological considerations which are hidden in a section which is not really appropriate. For example, the business model frame methodology and the power to hydrogen cost modeling. They're in a section which is not appropriate. But besides this, even there is a point that some key essential modeling parts are missing. For example, when you say about the hydrogen market modeling, how do you determine the hydrogen production quantities, which you then use to calculate profits and so on? Or even when you speak about SMR and the competition with this power to hydrogen assets, then I think this has to be a dedicated section which is kind of missing. Also the implementation details, so like we go from the business model frame to the actual model. I didn't see any kind of equation consideration of like how to integrate it into the, how it was integrated and modeled. Finally, in terms of modeling here, I also presented some other points which might require just a bit better justification. I think the choice of, for example, the choice of 2022 is interesting per se. And you also say how the cost of power to hydrogen systems might change from now until then. So you do take into account this temporal factor, but I would like a justification of why this year and why not 2030, why it's just like it's kind of a bit and also significant, at least to me. Like also the question of the German power market zone, specifying the question of like the question that you have the German, Austrian, and Luxembourg bidding zone, and so other questions I pointed here, which you can take a look at later. In terms of key modeling results, you do present the results in terms of hydrogen production costs. You present the profits of the power to hydrogen system in some cases and models of business, but you do not present it for all of them and present appropriate comparison, which I think is the relevant part of it. And at the same time, you also have the question of the system costs, like you're modeling or minimizing costs at the end of the day. So it's also something which it will be, I think, necessary in order to understand properly the results and be able to structure the paper better. So these are some of my main remarks. We'd like to thank you for your attention. We also have another miscellaneous slide you can take a look at later, but just some smaller remarks. Yeah, so I think now the floor is back to Yuan.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you for the time that you invested to give me feedback, such a good feedback and a valuable feedback. Of course, there's still work in progress, so there has to be a lot of things to be done. And I think your comments are really, yeah, really welcome to be integrated. Yeah, this was a lot of remarks. Maybe I start with commenting on the market design. So I basically choose not to split Germany into different market zones, as I think the government already discussed about this, that they do not want to do it. So I want to stick to only one market zone. Regarding the other two commands, I actually need to think about this once and take a bit of time. But certainly really good remarks, and I'm really happy for them. And regarding the modeling challenges that you presented on the other slide, yeah, there is also a lot of things that I agree they have to be integrated, and also yeah, the paper needs to be more elaborated on the description of the different aspects, I think. But yeah, once again, thank you very much for the comments, and I will take some time to think about them, and I really appreciate your contribution.
Is it possible to ask, to give a small question?
Yes, please.
I found the presentation very interesting, in particular also the comments. And my question goes a little bit more in the direction what Tim was giving. The question is, how can one provide incentives to take into account more the local scarcity in the networks, in the electricity networks? When we look at the hierarchy, you have the transmission, the high voltage transmission network, and then you have the middle voltage distribution network. And from the perspective of renewable energy, I would expect that the scarcity signals in the distribution networks become more and more relevant to provide the proper incentives when to inject, how the incentives for the microgrids or for the renewable energy injection in the distribution network, combining with what they are doing in the cities, or to generate on the local level. So that would go in the direction of what would you think if you make more and more disaggregated, the zones always more and more smaller, even you come finally to the nodal pricing approach. And as a nodal pricing approach in a real-time context, not in the day-ahead context. My question is, could that not also be a good substitute to come away from the curtailment and provide in real time the proper incentives for generating and consuming renewable energy?
Well, I certainly think this would be the case. It's just a question of the implementation, I think. And I think there's, for now, really little approaches into this direction, into nodal incentives. So this could also be, I think, well, a direction of research to combine this aspect into the question.
I would also like to comment on that. I fully agree with what Prof. Kniep said, and I don't think it's a flaw in the paper, but I think it should be said that assuming that we cannot send any signal to market participants, let's do it like this. But now it is implicit. It is not made explicit in the paper, because you could say, okay, if you don't signal anything to market participants, meaning no smaller zones or nodal pricing, meaning no tariff which are somehow locational or temporal dependent, meaning no flexibility markets. Yeah, definitely it's gonna not be worth for a market participants to use this type of technology because they don't see anything. And then you can think about TSOs, but it should be made explicit. And I think the real methodological concern I have is this idea of renewable energy that would have been curtailed otherwise, while if you really have the P2H bidding into the day-ahead market, while now you reserve it actually to solve issues after the market clearing, if you would let it bid, then there's no distinction anymore between what would have been curtailed, what is not curtailed. And therefore, I think your business models would suffer. And I don't see a reason why not let it be part of the day-ahead market. Why just keep it apart? Because if your day-ahead market scheduling is better in terms of like more flexible resources, you would actually have a better market outcome and you would have more feasible flows and you would have less need for congestion management. So this is very dangerous, I think.
Fair aspect, but I think if you would integrate the power to hydrogen unit into the day-ahead market, the problem would not be solved actually, because it already allocates some capacity from the day-ahead market and does not really solve the problem of the congestion management. And it also depends. I mean, the day-ahead market does not distinguish between the location of the load or the generator. And this is probably one of the main issues.
So the two are interconnected, the point about market signals and then whether to integrate it or not in the day-ahead, it's true. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you would install a power to hydrogen unit in the south of Germany, it would just increase the grid congestion problem. So it wouldn't solve it. So that's why the aspect and the information that the TSO has about the grid flows is quite valuable. But yeah, there must be a link somehow. I agree.
Yeah. But I think reserving it until congestion management, then you would underutilize it anyhow. But
yeah, I mean, TSOs currently do some forecasts before the day-ahead market clearing, and yeah, so they would have the information already before the day-ahead market clearing, but there's no incentives. I mean, they have not the right to give anyone the information to say, okay, you should bid on the market to operate it in this hour. So from that perspective, it doesn't work, but one could at least reserve the capacity during those hours for grid congestion purposes.